Good morning. Oh, sorry. I will try not to be too loud, not to talk too fast, and not to sniffle into the microphone. I think my body starts to degrade the second I leave the house. So I'm going to try and cough away or something and not deafen you if it happens. A little bit of background about myself. I have 40 years of being bad at video games, 25 years in cybersecurity. Some notable organizations or things that kind of framed my playing of video games. Early on, I was playing a game called Ultima Online, which was one of the first massively multiplayer online games. And in that game, pretty much immediately early in my gaming career, I fell in with kind of a rough crowd. And the guild I was in was a guild called Loot. There was never more than like 10 of us, but we were fairly notorious for our activities in game. And the fact that we would make little comic books about what it was we had done, right? So we would collectively get together, do things that we thought were funny to people, take their stuff, resell it to them, and then post a story about it the next day. After that, I move on to a game called EVE Online, and I'll get deeper into that. And EVE Online, for a number of years, I ran an organization called Goon Swarm, and we're going to discuss some really fun overlaps between the things we did to win in a game on EVE Online and how that can affect not only maybe have impacted future open source intelligence technologies that we all leverage today, but also some examples specifically to help with your tradecraft, your attribution management, and things of that nature. Some of it may be obvious, and I forgive me if it is. This is stuff that happened, sometimes in the early 2000s. But I think from a historical context, I also find it interesting. Just over my cybersecurity career, started as a general IT help desk guy, way back in the day before there were security programs, started a security program when they became, I think I found SANS somewhere and, started my first security program at a company. And since then was able to move through Deadbox Forensics and started to was hired by video game companies to start developing anti-cheat, anti-tamper, like protection mechanisms for their games, and realized very early on that layering a form of intelligence or open source intelligence on that gave me a lot more information about my adversaries and the people that I needed to be keeping an eye on, where I needed to be keeping an eye on them. And it became just an invaluable part of my tool set. And over the years, I've had to stand up and build teams specifically to grow hunters for legal engagements within the industry. OSINT in games. We will start with some common examples you all might have known. The War Thunder forums, or the gifts that keep giving. I believe there were 16 classified document leaks on the War Thunder forums between 2021 and 2024. And the way this, plays out is usually like some dude's like, the M1 Abrams tank has a diameter of 2 decameters, and somebody's like, hell no, and somebody's like, I know more than you do, and they're like, no, you don't. Here's the classified documents, and then everyone gets called. Like, I guess we know who was right, but I don't know that that's what he wants, right? Another example from recently is the Discord leaks. An Air National Guardsman in the past years, all over the press. I think he just pled guilty like last week. Texera, I think his name was, had something to the amount of 300 documents of various high classifications regarding current events around a nuclear program, Ukraine, et cetera. Not stuff you would want out there. Discord isn't necessarily a gaming platform itself, but it is a kind of a gathering point for that, right? It's like a chat room gamers use. It's where they all want to go. It's where you can share information. And it's where a lot of stuff is happening along these lines right now. Then there's Gravy Analytics is another example. And the reason I use this in relation to gaming is because a lot of the applications that were used to track the ad IDs that Gravy Analytics was doing their work with came from games. And I believe in the case of Gravy Analytics, I don't even believe the manufacturers of the titles were complicit. It's just the way the ad buying networks work and how they're able to manipulate that. I'm not going to get into a dissertation on ad IDs because I'm not the right person for it. But at the end of the day, the ideas, and I know I saw it mentioned in Slack yesterday, ad IDs are something to be very aware of. They do allow, up to the location tracking and things of that nature. So, there's that. And then EVE Online has just always been a hotbed of open source intelligence and related activity, whether that be ethical or unethical, right? It really straddles the boundaries. One thing before I get into EVE Online, I do want to touch on is I want to touch on my use of the terminology non-traditional. I used it in the title slide as well. And just for a point of clarification, I consider non-traditional intelligence gathering in this case just the places you wouldn't normally be, right? It's the stuff you might not be able to go to a vendor and buy, right? Like, I don't know if you're going to find too many vendors out there who are going to sell you real-time chat logs of your favorite EVE Online, guilds forum group, right? You're going to have to figure out a way to facilitate that yourself if that's what you have to do, or work with a partner who will then do that for you, right? But that's where that came from. EVE Online in particular, to give a little background on it, is it's a spaceship game. It's an MMO, tens of thousands of players at once in a fight in space on the internet, competing for land. And it's very cutthroat in that destruction is permanent. It takes a long time to gain resources. All manner of things that are unacceptable in other games are perfectly acceptable in EVE: scamming, stealing, robbing, doing bad things to blow people up, getting information from places you shouldn't be getting it and using it, things of that nature are pretty par for the course. And so that's why it's a platform where a lot of this type of stuff can occur. Why does that occur in EVE Online? It's a highly competitive environment. Everyone's driven. There are people who just don't sleep, basically, to play this game. And a lot of it's because things are based on real world timing, right? So in order to conquer a system, you might have to wake up. Like, there are groups of people who are like, all 1,000 of you need to wake up at 4 a.m. today to save this tower. And people do it. So that also leads to this type of highly competitive conflict. And the other thing is, I don't know what it's like today because I haven't played in like 10 or 15 years, but there was a lot of time. It took a lot of time to blow big things up. And so while you have your EVE Online monitor sitting there running your ship, blowing things up, what else are you going to do, right? So, you get into trouble or you start digging around and doing other things. A lot of the leadership in the group we had, especially on the technical side, maybe didn't even log into the game. A lot of the work was done kind of externally. And the other thing is, I like to win, right? And so, taking advantage of everything that was available to us gave us the opportunity to beat an enemy that was there a lot longer than we are, that was highly entrenched, that had a lot of resource. It allowed us to act asymmetrically in ways that they didn't expect. So to get into kind of the details of that, how it started was we're a plucky young group of folks from a particular forum who all get together and start playing this game at the same time. And I'm leaving names out of these conversations purposefully. Many of these people have gone on to successful OSINT careers, founded companies, and did other things, and I don't think they'd appreciate being name dropped. They're welcome to out themselves if they'd like. The spy game in EVE is essentially you have a space corporation and you have a space corporation, and we don't like each other, and I want to blow up your stuff and take your space, and you want to blow up his stuff and take his space. What I'm going to do in order to gain advantage is I'm going to recruit people from my group that want to pretend to be that they want to be in your group, right? And then when they join your group, they get access to all your resources, all your information. They know when you're going to huddle up. They know when you're gathering. They know where you store your things. Like, they get access to all the logistics and secret sauce, the same type of thing you would want to do in a military engagement, right? So some of the things we got into to leverage advantage was early on in the game, there was always a spy game. Sneaking into other people's alliances to, scam them, steal them, rob their things was a common thing. Some of the biggest stories in EVE Online before I started playing it early on in the game was people gaining people's trust and then taking their things and writing stories and laughing about it. We were more about winning space conquests, though we took things as well. But then some of our technical folks got together and they're like, we can really kind of get better at this. And this is where potentially tradecraft comes in. One of the first things we figured out is, well, if I'm going to have somebody join another group, I'll have them join their forums. Forums have signatures. Why don't I host all these images on our web server? And then we use all of the IP addresses we gather on the enemy forum as an oracle to catch the spies they're sticking on our forum. So what we would do is we would actually have a constant running list of all of the IP address of all of the users on all of the forums we had snuck our spies into. And we would then constantly be running that against our own web server logs to catch the spies and kick them out. This is something to be cognizant of, obviously, in your own tradecraft as well, right? Use proxies, do all those other things. The alt detector was something interesting because what the alt detector did was that was something a little, to give a little background, the EVE Online forums, CCP games, had a forum, and you could only post with your real character because they wanted messaging to have consequences, right? And some groups at the time were sensitive to like political and information type stuff. And they would be like, nobody from my serious allowance is allowed to post on the forum. So people would make fake accounts and post things on the forum, or they would do that to leak information, like, you know, happens today at like, you know, big companies, right? The employees are not happy. Here's an internal memo, send it to the news. This would just end up on the EVE forums. Here's something embarrassing the CEO of Space Corp X said, you know, whatever. We found out that if we leveraged forum bugs on the EVE Online forum, that based on some fun things we could do with timing, if somebody made a post that we wanted to know who it was, we could usually figure it out based on referrer data and things of that nature when they made the post. So essentially that lasted about 3 months before CCP figured out they did it. We did it, and they were one of the first forums I can recall off the top of my head to remove external image hosting for banners specifically for that reason. That was a lot at once. Counterintelligence technology. So one of the other things we did, and this is back in 2003, 4, 5. Hidden text is the term I put there. The real term I think is canaries. Oh, no, it's underneath it, but perfect. In general, the idea was with those messages we were talking about, right? Somebody makes a forum post that has some valuable intelligence related information in it, and then they go post that on the internet. How do I figure out who that person is, right? I sent that message. I had 5,000 people at the time, I think, in Goons Forum. I'm not going to know who made that post. So what we figured out is one of my compatriots in another alliance had a thing where they put like a little hidden code that was not viewable unless you highlighted the whole message at the end. So when the person copy pasted it, a number or whatever would be at the end, and then they would, oh, whoops, we know who that is because that's their account number, right? And that gave them away. But I felt that was that worked a number of times, but I also felt it was a little inelegant and kind of tipped their hand. So what we came up with was a canary, and I'm not sure how often we applied this, but essentially what we figured out is that even with thousands of accounts, we only needed to have a very small number of change points in a message on a post on a forum in order to make a message that would be unique to every single one of our users. And it was very small. It was only like 5, 6 different points of change. And it would literally be a binary change. So it can be a 1 or a 0, turn a period into a comma, you know, put an extra space between a word, something that wouldn't necessarily be, and then do that in a certain number of places all at once. And at the end of the day, when somebody copy pasted a message, I could literally look at a message and go 101110, turn that into decimal. That's their account number. We know who posted that message. So that's, you know, counter-intel stuff that can still be done today. One of the other interesting things we got into is I got into real-time chat monitoring, right? So the organization we were fighting against was a rather large entrenched organization, and they did all of their communications on IRC. So I said, hey, it'd probably be pretty valuable to be able to excuse me, not just see that, but make that available to my whole team. Like we could just sit around and do like Mystery Science Theater, just watch these folks like chat all day long. So what we did is I wrote an IRC bot that essentially sat in their channel and just mirrored everything that happened in their channel to my own IRC server. And then we just sat in that server and logged it and ran it for years. And that gave us tremendous advantage. We knew when they were forming up. We knew everything they were doing. We're doing this a lot now today with things like, obviously, Telegram and other messaging platforms. But back then, this was like, I don't know how long it took them to figure out anyone was doing this. Another example of how we leverage things from a counterintelligence perspective is the spy master is the term we used in your guild. The spy master in our opposing alliance, like people we were fighting against, was a gentleman called Jake Noble. And I knew that he was running multiple accounts on our server to like monitor our stuff. So I need to figure out who is this person and get rid of them, right? So one day I do like the lowest rent thing that probably wouldn't work today, but I just make a burner, drop on his IRC. I'm like, oh, Jake, saw there was a meet last weekend and some crazy stuff happened. Is this you? And send him a photo of some dude doing something ridiculous, but it was a photo hosted on my web server. And we clicked it, get his IP address, find all the spies on my forums. There was a purge that day, and there was no more Jake Noble. That type of stuff I think is a little more common now. But the other interesting thing, though, one of the most interesting ones to me, because it happened within the platform, was the things we were able to do with the test server to gain advantage. And the reason I talk about this stuff is because it's not something I would think I would just commonly look for, right? So what we discovered is that if we logged onto the test server and joined the bad guy group we wanted to do things to, we could actually see a lot about where their assets were positioned. So we would just join the test server, join their group, which was free join. There was no restrictions. That was one of the vulnerabilities they had. And long story short, when we ended up winning a big giant space war, that was a big loud thing. A lot of it was because we had advance notice of where they had pre-positioned their most expensive assets. And because we logged onto the test server and saw them. And so we were able to flood the system and lock it down for we had people in that system for weeks, just all day long, keeping them from getting out of their space station. And the way we were able to do that was to take advantage of an information disclosure on the test server, right, is really what that boiled down to. And then the other thing that gained advantage is we ended up with a turncoat. That's what really ended it all. And that's not necessarily an OSINT or technical thing, but basically we turned somebody and got them to just throw the switch that said delete alliance for the team we were fighting. And then they had nothing and we won. So now to get into how that gets applied professionally, I go through my career and go from company to company, working at a video game company somewhere, and I'm tasked with solving a cheating problem, right? And I've already approached it from a technical perspective where I'm doing client-side analysis, I've reversed cheats, and we're taking a look at kind of what they're doing to impact the client. And we've looked at behavioral stuff as well, right? Where we're looking at what's in the database, what are the things that are untoward about the client? Are there activities that are happening too fast? Are there things that are out of bounds, et cetera, the obvious stuff? But then I approached legal and I was like, look, there have been cases where legal action against cheaters has been successful. Maybe we should do that. And they're like, okay, but we don't know who any of these people are. I'm like, oh, well, I'll go to OSINT training at DEF CON and then we'll figure it out, right? So I went to OSINT training at DEF CON and sure enough, figured out who this dude was after I got back. He was a gentleman in Belgium, and it was one of my fun stories because nobody ever expects the knock and talk at like 6 in the morning when your dude is just writing cheats all day or whatever. So we show up and just knock on the door in the morning, and he shows up in his bathrobe. And he's like, "What?" Like he's like, "What's going on?" And we're just like, "We're so and so from such and such company." He's like, "Oh, I thought you were my maid," and it was just really just not what I expected at all. And then we sat in his living room and he's like, so, hey, look at me, he goes, so, my cheat been detected? And I'm just like, how did I get here? Yeah, so, leveraging the real thing there, though, was in order to identify him, there was a body of work that had to be done, reversing what are essentially, identifiers such as username, and in getting that to an identity in Belgium can be a challenge. And the bulk of the information we were able to leverage to do that came from internal and external gaming sources rather than some sort of. I wasn't even using HBL or anything like that, or Hack Breach Leak or anything like that back then, right? So literally all the investigation I did to handle this Belgian thing came from tracking identities through the platform we knew, the username he knew, forums we knew who he was on, and then marrying that to Steam platform and the gaming platform accounts, and then being able to move from there to somewhere we had actual visibility into the back-end data as well. So literally all the investigation I did to handle this Belgian thing came from tracking identities through the platform we knew, the username he knew, forums we knew who he was on, and then marrying that to Steam platform accounts, and then being able to move from there to somewhere we had actual visibility into the back-end data as well. So one of the cheat codes about working at a game company is you can see the game company's data, right? And a hardware ID on a console is just as unique as an IMEI on a cell phone, right? That is a hardware identifier. Where that hardware goes, I can guarantee that hardware is always that same hardware for the most part. It can be spoofed once the platform is taken and whatever else. But just wanted to mention that based on what he had said. Another example of leveraging video game technologies to conduct business operations. This is much later on. I was asked to engage in this is where I have to start thinking through what I'm saying, due diligence exercise to take a look at something for a potential engagement for the business. And the usual stuff is done, right? Everyone goes and runs a DNB, looks at their credit, did they pay their bills right, and whatever else. But I'm like, who are these people? What are these people doing when they're not doing this? So we start poking at the primaries at the top of the company, find their Steam accounts and whatnot. And long story short, I discover that they're connected to some people in some Steam groups and Discord groups that are like very interesting looking folks. And then digging deeper, actually, in this case, won't get into detail, but led to results of being able to find business entanglements that we wouldn't have looked for otherwise. If we didn't know that these people were playing these games together, we would never have seen the relationship where they were discussing the business relations they had elsewhere. And then once we found those, it showed just some things that I'm not going to say what may have happened with the deal, but it was very valuable to get that information, and it had an impact where just taking a look at the DNB and the usual due diligence stuff wouldn't have gotten it. The reason I mentioned Discord is because that's a place where a lot of communication happens. If I was trying to get up on a gaming group right now, it's highly likely that I would have to be monitoring on Discord. There's ways to do it. There's platforms that can do it. I think Unit 221B has a good platform for, I think, Discord and Telegram monitoring. And then Steam in particular, for those of you who are not aware, maintains a history of a lot of stuff. So one of the more useful things, just low-hanging fruit right off the bat from a Steam account, is you get an entire history of name changes on that Steam account. And I can't tell you how many people thought using their real name as their Steam account ID the first time they made it was the way to go, right? Because back in the day, it was the internet, nobody figured any of this stuff out, right? And the thing is that history of name changes has been captured. So with the right platforms and the right digging, you can actually go back through things like that. You can also go through history of things like people's friends lists. Who have they been connected to over time? Who are they not connected to anymore? And then you can find things like posts they've made on forums, things of that nature. Related to that, it's just a ton of valuable information when you're looking specifically at a group involved in gaming. Steam has always been one of my best resources. We've also had some heavier stuff, right? In video games, I've been asked to assist with murder stuff, with missing persons type stuff. One of the things about consoles and things of that nature, add IDs, right? You get information when the console connects. We might have information about whether this person connected. Specifically when it comes to investigations for things like murder, it's usually something like, they claimed they were trying to name a game I didn't work on. They claimed they were playing solitaire at the time, so they couldn't have been, stabbing someone in the next room. Were they? And so that's the type of stuff you get into. One of the more interesting ones I had though was ISIS. ISIS used the game I was working on to make a recruitment video, and that caused me to have to look at things involving ISIS. So the point being that just because that video games are a serious business, there is a lot of data back there and behind there, and there's a lot of things that could prove valuable in an investigation. If we were going to find who these ISIS folks were or whatever it was the government wanted to do, it was going to have to come from our data, right? So it was super interesting. There was only one media organization that really spread it really far. But it was just one of those things where I was like, I woke up and I was just like, come on, dude, this is not what I expected to see today. And then along those lines, what I'll share is what I consider one of my most interesting incidents, that to date, the best I've been able to figure out is they were just trying to rob kids in a video game. But when I talk about the sophistication involved in doing this, it's clear that these are folks who are probably involved in other things, and not my job to get to the bottom of that. But in this case, I get pulled in because somebody is essentially on a title I'm tangentially related to, stealing things from people and then reselling them on their own website. And then they're promoting this website as like this major new business in collaboration with the company that I work for. And when they do that, they publicly name, they post their their legal business certificate. Like they want everyone to know they're legitimate business folks. And when I look up the business certificate, like the real business certificate, and when I look up the name of the person on the business certificate, I start getting into this like really elaborate international astroturfing campaign where, for whatever reason, in order to start setting up this campaign to steal money or whatever from video game players, they went and had articles planted in the press. I believe the earliest ones I found were planted in press based in India. And then some of those articles went viral to like repeaters and aggregators like Yahoo News and places of that nature, all hyping up who this fake person is and how legitimate they are and how smart they are and how wonderful they are at making this new business enterprise. And I'm like, that's kind of crazy. But whatever. And then I dig a little deeper and find out that they also have a business registration in the UK. And in the UK, to get that business registration, they had to have showed a passport from another country that had this identity information on it. So somehow they were able to show identity information that allowed the UK government to give them a business registration and also provide documentation in the US that made them appear to be a US citizen that allowed them to generate business documentation. And the way I got to that was essentially there was a conflict on some identifier that there cannot be a conflict on with this human being. So they found some way somehow to craft documentation that was legitimate in 2 countries. And thus far, all I've been able to suss out with that is they're either heavily involved in something dirty and this is their way of being able to make money, right? So maybe they're working for a government, maybe they're doing a thing and involves some shady stuff somewhere else, and then they just look away and allow them to profit in other cases. But I still have not figured out what the long game is, unfortunately, on just the astroturfing, the spread of information. Like they wrote wiki articles, they had news articles. Like if you search about this person, it would appear that they were like a known entity everywhere. And it was just really, really bizarre. So getting into it, part of the reason I wanted to have this, closing thoughts here, is as Matt said, the context, I like to call it like Schrodinger's like OSINT, right? And I only do, anyone who's like a physicist is going to hate me for this because I know I'm saying it completely wrong. But my point with Schrodinger's is that the context of the environment is very important, and the context and how you're presenting yourself and inverting your environment is very important in the collection of your intelligence, right? So when the common things we go and we look at and we dig up typically is like, hey, I need to monitor this person. I'm going to get up on their social media profiles. I'm going to get up on their their work stuff. We're going to see what we can figure out from what other accounts they have in other places and how to observe those. But it's in the context of game that I've found they really kind of let loose. This is their leisure time. This is what they're doing when they're with their friends. And if you can, get to that, then my experience has been that I've found much more valuable information, or in some cases just found things I wouldn't have found otherwise. I wouldn't have closed investigations if I didn't look at them where they didn't expect to be being watched. And that's going to extend deeper, think way outside the box on that. If you get up on a target, this works the other way too as well. From a managed attribution perspective, consider your own attribution when you're playing a game, right? I can tell you stories, even personally, of people that I know who, were in horrific situations and still communicating with their video game friends. Probably shouldn't have been able to, based on where they were at the time. And if I'm able to communicate them and they're able to communicate with their spaceship guild, then a nation state or an adversary or somebody else is also able, probably more easily, to sneak into my EVE Online guild for somebody than it is to sneak into a government chat room, right? So the effort involved and the value of collection I've found can be extreme, especially if the target is somebody who's a very avid gamer. Yes. So the idea is patterns of life involve living, right? You have to meet them where they are, not where you want them to be, right? They're gonna play whatever games they play. You need to adapt to that, understand the environment, and learn it. Their gamers are people who tend to do things regularly. They're going to keep playing their games. They're going to have favorite games. They're going to keep going to this watering hole. And if you get creative, think about it. The real-time chat monitoring you can get from places on Discord and things of that nature is one thing. But if you have something high value or someone high value, you can do things where, what if you want to hear what they're saying, right? Getting once you have their identities and you're mapping what games they're playing, you can get matched up with them, record their conversations in game. You might get them saying things they really shouldn't be saying out loud, even anecdotally, just because of that. Then I flip that around, meet them where they are, not where they want you to be, but that's also because the idea is to juxtapose, right? I don't always want to look at things from the same angle. I want to flip it around and look at it from a different direction. It's not, we all have our tools and our processes and our things that we go through, and I'm just as guilty of that as anyone else. Just I happen to have come from a non-traditional background. I didn't go to college. I have to make up words if I don't know the terminology. And the idea here is that because of that, I might approach a problem in a different way. I find that if I always start an investigation, and this is why I hate flowcharts and things. If I start an investigation and I always follow the same path, or I presume things and make assumptions with how it's going to happen, then there will be times where I'll miss information or I just won't get there. And sometimes what I have to do is just kind of nuke the graph and come from a different direction and just find much different things. Yep. And the other thing is to don't overestimate your targets. Serious people do seriously stupid things. And give an idiot a chainsaw, he's going to wave it around. So that's going to be common everywhere. So don't ever overestimate what's going on, and don't presume these days pretty much everyone's a gamer. That's why this gravy analytics stuff and the ad ID stuff is so effective. It's because everyone's got these apps and these things in our life we live on, and this isn't limited to gaming. This is everywhere, right? There's other stories I've read with operations like Ukrainian intelligence did, where they used, I think, Strava to watch the pattern of life of a Russian general who was doing his runs every day, right? I read another really good article the other day from somebody who was doing work on, it was golf apps. It was somebody, I think it was in the OSINT newsletter, somebody wrote a breakdown on using golfing apps to determine patterns of life. So that's another thing to think through is when we're trying to figure out what people are doing from a day-to-day basis, what they're saying on Instagram and Facebook and whatever else, they know that's going to an audience. That's image crafting, right? It's finding those other pieces and connecting those other dots can be a lot more valuable, right? So that's what I've got. Ready for questions?